Chapter 5 Listening Leads to Understanding. Julie and Brian were arguing about going to see her parents. "We were just down there 2 weeks ago," Brian said. "I know," said Julia, "but Sunday is my mother's birthday." "Then send her a card," Brian said. "I don't believe you," Julia said. "You are the most selfish person I ever met." "Well, you haven't met many people," Brian replied. "I don't know any man who wants to visit his in-laws every 2 weeks. "I'm not asking you to go every 2 weeks," Julia said as she started sobbing and walked out of the room. Brian and Julie have never learned how to listen empathetically. But now, let's imagine that they have read Chapter 4 and were trying to be empathetic listeners. The conversation might have gone like this. "Why do you want to go to see your parents again this weekend? We were just there 2 weeks ago." "I know, but this Sunday is my mother's birthday." "Are birthdays a big deal in your family?" "Yes, they are. My sister and I have given my mother a birthday dinner every year since we were 5 years old. I still remember the first year when my dad helped us make cupcakes and decorate them." "So your sister is going to be there on Saturday?" "Oh yes, she wouldn't miss it." "Is her husband also coming?" "Unless he has to work. Some years he has to work and can't get away." "Do you want me to go with you, or would you rather be going by yourself?" "I want you to go with me, Brian. It's a family thing, and I want you to be a part of it." "Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly do you want me to go?" 10. "Okay, then I'll go." "Oh, Brian, I love you so much." Why did things turn out so differently in the second scenario? Because Brian listened empathetically before he responded. His listening led him to understand how important the birthday party was to Julia and how strongly she wanted him to participate. On the one hand, Brian also has his opinions. He wants his relationship with Julia to be authentic, so he says to her, "Would you like to know why I was hesitant at first about going to your parents this Saturday?" "I assumed it was because we were just there 2 weeks ago." "That's part of it, but there's more to it than that. Would you like to hear it?" Brian is trying to help Julia get into their listening mode. "Yes," Julia says as she sits down on the couch and looks at him. "I was invited to play on the all-star team of the church softball league. I was really excited about it. You know how much I love to play softball. But when I realized how important it was to you, I felt that being with you was more important than playing softball." "Oh, Brian, now I love you even more. I can't believe you are willing to give up the all-star team in order to be with my family." After a moment of reflection, Julie asked, "What time is the softball game?" 2 o'clock. Why do you ask?" "It just occurred to me that maybe you could play in the game and come to Mother's late. Dinner isn't until 6. You might be a little late, but that would be all right." On a scale of 1 to 10, Julia says with a smile, "How strongly do you feel about playing in the game?" "Do you really want to know?" "Certainly," Julia says, still smiling. "About a 9. "Then let's do it that way. I don't mind at all if you get there a little late." "But that would mean driving 2 cars," Brian says, "and we wouldn't be together driving down and back." "We'll make it up when we get home." "You're serious, aren't you?" "Yes, I am. Julia, you are incredible. I love you so much." In this scenario, it was Julia's efforts to listen empathetically that led her to understand how important the softball game was to Brian. Both Brian and Julia displayed an attitude of respect, love, and togetherness, which brought them to a win-win resolution of their conflict. Many couples argue about conflicts rather than resolving them because they never come to understand each other's point of view. They spend their energy promoting their own perspectives rather than seeking to understand their spouse's perspective. Understanding involves the following 4 objectives, all of which can be obtained by empathetic listening. 1. Know what your spouse is really saying. This is not as easy as it sounds. In fact, one of the most common mistakes that couples make is responding to what they think their spouse is saying without actually listening to what it is being said. For example, Brian's initial interpretation was that Julie wanted to visit her parents a couple of times a month. This misunderstanding simulated negative emotions inside of him. However, he had not yet heard what Julia was saying. She was talking about a birthday dinner, a long tradition, and family values. Had Brian listened empathetically, he would have heard and understood what was really important to Julia. 2. Hear your spouse's feelings. In his initial encounter with Julie, had Brian been listening, he would have heard his wife expressing the emotions of hurt, disappointment, and anger. But because he was not listening empathetically, Brian did not hear these emotions. His failure to listen left Julie sobbing and the conflict unresolved. 3. Discover what is truly important to your spouse and why. Had Brian listened empathetically, he would have discovered why it was so important to Julie to go to her mother's birthday dinner. It was a long-standing tradition accompanied by warm feelings of family togetherness. Brian would have discovered that Julie's desires for him to be with her on that special occasion hinged on the value she placed on family gatherings. Conversely, had Julia listened empathetically to Brian, she would have discovered why playing in a softball tournament was so important to him. It was an honor to be selected and had strong ties with his sense of self-esteem and commitment to the team. 4. Determine how strongly your spouse feels about his or her perspective. Using a 1 to 10 scale is an easy way to determine how strongly your spouse feels about an issue. In fact, this is often the easiest place to begin when you are trying to understand your spouse. If you and your spouse are discussing Christmas shopping, for example, you might ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly do you feel about going shopping with me? If your spouse responds with a number like 7 and 10, and your own desire is between 1 and 4, then you know that you must quickly shift into listening mode if you are going to resolve this conflict. You might then ask, when would you like to go shopping? How long would you like me to shop with you? What would you like my role to be in the process? These questions are designed to determine what your spouse truly desires. Then you might ask, how would you feel if I decided not to go shopping with you? Or, how would you feel if I decided to go shopping with you? The answers to these questions will reveal not only your spouse's feelings, but also what impact your decision will have on your relationship. Next, you can ask, why is my going shopping with you so important? You may discover that the reason your spouse values your participation is that he or she seems as a measure of health of your marriage. Perhaps your spouse's parents always did their Christmas shopping together, and it was an event that communicated, we enjoy being together. On the other hand, you might discover that the reason is so important to your spouse is that he or she feels very ill-prepared to select gifts for you, or she feels very ill-prepared to select gifts for your parents and really needs your input. There may be any number of reasons why your spouse considers your participation so important. It is by means of empathetic listening that you will discover not only what your spouse is saying, but also how he or she is feeling and why this issue is so important. The sense of being understood and affirmed by one spouse is a major step in creating an atmosphere where conflicts can be resolved. I hear what you are saying, and it makes a lot of sense to me, is a $1 million statement in resolving conflicts. It is what everyone longs to hear in a conflict situation. We all want to be understood and affirmed. Empathetic listening is the exact opposite of argument approach, in which both parties are more interested in asserting their own opinions than in taking time to understand what the other is saying, thinking, and feeling. Asserting one's own opinion first without listening comes across as rejection and condemnation, which fosters defensive feelings and resentment. This is why arguments lead to emotional distance. Empathetic listening, on the other hand, leads to understanding and affirmation. Couples are not likely to resolve conflicts in a positive way if they don't understand each other. Understanding comes from listening and asking clarifying questions. When husbands and wives understand what their spouse are saying, why an issue is so important to them, how strongly they feel about it, and the emotions that accompany their desires, only then can they have intelligent and loving responses. Spouses who love each other by taking time to understand each other will be able to resolve conflicts in a healthy way. Putting the principles into practice. 1. Many couples argue about conflicts rather than resolve them because they never come to understand each other's point of view. Here are 4 questions to help you understand your spouse. What is my spouse saying? What is my spouse feeling? Why is this important to my spouse? On a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly does my spouse desire this? 2. Once you understand your spouse and you have an opportunity to give an intelligent and loving response, how intelligent and how loving was your response in the most recent conflict with your spouse?